Okay, thanks, Sarah. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and certainly pleased to see such an enormous turnout. And congratulations to the UK government, as well as the Commission, for holding this here. I was just thinking, coming in, I was asking, what is this beautiful building? Because I've never been here before, and someone explained to me that this is a Methodist church, and I think it's quite appropriate, because this is an issue that is a legal issue, but as much an issue of morality, so I'm glad you picked this place. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. Obviously, I'm here not only on behalf of Unilever, but I think representing a little bit broader view of the industry in total, and then having the opportunity to do that with the International Chamber of Commerce and its business actions to Stop Counterfeiting and Piracy initiative is obviously very timely. We go around, Unilever is in 190 countries, we go around many of them. I probably hit about 40, 50 a year as a minimum. And it's very rare that we don't put this topic on the agenda, to be honest. I think this is one of the burning issues of making society function. And there still is an enormous level of unawareness out there, or lack of capability to put word into action. And keeping this very high on the agenda and the work you do, I can only tell you that we appreciate that. This is far more important than the topic you're talking about. You know, in today's world, I've often used the term VUCA world. We live in a very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. VUCA world. And obviously, in that world, the trust is probably one of the scarcest commodities that is there, what we struggle with. We were talking about the issue of youth right now, and why youth thinks it's okay to rip off companies or beat the system. It really is a lack of trust. It's a lack of trust in the brands or in the companies, or frankly in society. And obviously, we know from many of the surveys that you read as well, that trust is in very short supply. In fact, we issued the latest Edelman survey on trust during the World Economic Forum and January. And more than half the people have lost their trust in governments, and frankly business and CEOs, may I add, is not much better than that. So we have an issue. We have an issue to work on ourselves as we work on others, like on the counterfeit, to help us fix this issue. In Unilever, we changed the way we did business, our business model. We call it now the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which is hopefully a better way of further gaining trust in our business and in inspiring citizens of this world, don't call them consumers anymore, and inspiring citizens of this world to be enrolled in that journey as well. Our vision is very simple. We think we have enough opportunity to double our turnover, and we're well on our way. Many places in the world still need to move out of poverty. We still have 2 to 3 billion people more coming to this world, if we like it or not. There's ample opportunity to grow, something you probably sometimes forget about if you live in Europe. But we clearly have to do this differently, and we've called ourselves for a business model that decouples our growth from environmental impact, and a business model that maximizes our positive social impact. In fact, it's a business model where we just simply go back to putting us at the service of society, square and firmly, and not at the service of our shareholders. And I think that is one of the most important things we can do to regain that trust, especially with this young generation that we talked about. The issues that we face, I think, are already of such magnitude that it's not simply good enough anymore to be slightly less bad or to be simply on the right side of the law. Businesses that need to be accepted, short-term and long-term, need to be businesses that make a positive contribution to addressing some of these major issues we've out there. Issues like poverty, issues like climate change, issues like nutrition, issues like food security, and issues like youth unemployment, and obviously I could go on and on and on. So we can only do this by taking responsibility, not only of our own operations, but obviously, which is only a small part, after all, of what any company does, but by also taking co-responsibility of our influence across the total value chain. In our case, if you're in a food business, it would be from farm to fork, if you can talk that way. Now, this means working with citizens of this world very closely, and often trying to change ingrained habits of patterns of behavior that we have. And we have an enormous opportunity here. A company like Unilever actually reaches 2 billion consumers a day, either by using our products or purchasing our products anywhere in the world in the 190 countries that we operate under. There is no government that reaches 2 billion consumers a day. So if we can harness that reach and that force and turn it into a force for good, I think we can handle any of the problems, including the one that you talked today. If we can really change that behavior, we can be and become together an enormous force for good in this world. And I believe we're starting to do this. In a company like ours, we do that mainly, not surprisingly, through our brands. One of the key brands is Domestos, fighting the issue of open defecation, or our business brands like Knorr, fighting the issues of smallhold farmers, job creation, sustainable farming, or nutrition. Brands like Pureit, fighting these issues of lack of water or clean drinking water. Lifebuoy, a wonderful brand, long history in the UK, simply fighting the issues of hygiene, getting kids to wash their hands a few times a day. Still 3 million kids dying under the age of 5, totally unnecessarily, and we're frankly not doing much about that. So putting all these brands to the service of society, to addressing some of these enormous problems, makes the trust in us as businesses hopefully also a little bit better than we see today, and also will undoubtedly change the behavior of many of the young people. The conclusions that young people don't care or cheat the system or want to buy, I think is very much based from a very limited perspective of some of the things that are happening here in Europe and the US, and doesn't really reflect the other, what soon will become 80% of the world population, which will live outside of Europe and the US, where actually we see some quite different behavior. But in all of this, it's the trust that is the bedrock of that relationship. There's no doubt about that. It's the trust that you need to build that prosperity for society and obviously for companies to thrive in as well. And we do that, as I mentioned, with our brands and our services, but there are many different ways to do that. Now, let me just explain why that trust is so important for a company like ours. You take a company like Unilever, one of the bigger companies in the world. Our market cap is well over 100 billion. Our asset value is about 35 billion. Now, what's the difference between the 35 billion and the 100 billion, to keep it simple? Some people call it goodwill. I don't. I call it reputation. It purely is that. The difference, 75 billion of our market cap, is reputation. And increasingly, we've seen that reputation go up and down like a yo-yo, and as a result, the market cap go up and down like a yo-yo by companies that don't play their role. Companies that manipulate the LIBOR rate of foreign exchange rates, or companies that buy from a Rana Plaza factory where people are forced in at gunpoint and 1,050 people leave their lives, or companies that sell you the horse instead of the beef, or companies that skimp on their maintenance and have the well explode. Citizens increasingly have the possibility to vote you out of office, to attack that credibility, that reputation. Connected more and more by internet, able to aggregate their voices, and it's happening all over the world. Just like they're voting politicians out of office at a speed that you've never seen before, the same is happening with irresponsible businesses. But it's exactly that reputation that we talk about that we need to build, and I think more of us on our side of the equation need to work a little bit harder to bring that back. You cannot, Stephen Covey in his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders has a sentence in there where he says, you cannot talk your way out of things you've behaved yourself into. If we talk these issues, don't blame someone else. Start with ourselves and look at how we should behave as companies here in Europe, but obviously also across the world. Now, our products obviously are at the roots of driving this much more responsible business model, and I've given you some examples of that. And that's why it's absolutely important that we protect the investments that we make in these brands or in these products. Obviously, investments in innovation that we just talked about are creating these intellectual properties, and we do a lot of that. A company like ours, we're actually, unknown to many of you, one of the biggest investors in R&D in the UK. In fact, in the UK and the Netherlands, we issue more patents than any other company that is registered there. We employ about 6,000 people in R&D. Here in the UK, we have enormous research centers in Port Sunlight and in Colworth. And the Leverhulme Trust is probably one of the biggest contributors to advanced science in many other parts of the academic world especially. We have about 127,000 trademarks, 20,000 registered patents and patents applications running right now. And obviously, that list will only increase if we have our way in this increasingly broader footprint that we we will have as a company. So that's why I simply felt it was important to be here with you. And it only takes one bad experience with a counterfeit product, to be honest, to violate that trust, to threaten that reputation that we talked about, and to put our business at risk. Now, selling horse meat instead of beef, to me, is as much of a counterfeit. So we talk about a broader topic here than perhaps you're talking about. And I think it's that essence of the trust in the brands that will people love your company or not, and will decide the success of your company or not. You know the facts better than I do, and undoubtedly in every speech you'll hear today, you'll get the facts, but it's about 1 to 2% of turnover every year that you classify as counterfeit. For Unilever, that means a turnover loss of about €1 billion. Even for a company like us, that's not a small amount, I can tell you. Although we like to think of ourselves as a small grocery store, we do work with big numbers. And these are very important things for us. This year alone in the real world, I'll talk to the online world in a second, but the Unilever brand protection team has worked on over 3,000 incidents. It's one of the departments I continue to invest in, to be sure that we go after everybody ruthlessly. But we had about 3,000 incidents. Most of the work needs to be done by our own people, not much help from the outside, may I say, to go after these counterfeit products. And the most recent operation actually happened this weekend, that I was informed, and I get informed with most of them, in Dublin. You don't have to go to Nigeria or many of the other places that you think it happens, or the Chinas or other things. This was the Irish Garda arrested actually a few people which were laundering some of our products. Now, globally, this trade in counterfeit and pirated goods results in more than 1 trillion loss, according to the estimates, and a loss to many people, to consumers, to governments, to companies, etc. Obviously, it denies the governments of the legitimate revenues that we need more than ever in this environment. The tax that it attracts, it obviously is often associated with criminal behavior that has other side effects we don't want to talk about. And as a company, it is obviously that trust that we have spent years on building, hundreds of years of building in our case, that puts whole industries in jeopardy. And that's why it's a serious thing. Now, it's not just about money. In fact, at a time that we need to create more jobs than ever in this world where too many people are excluded, just the issue of counterfeit is estimated to affect 2 million, or put 2 million jobs at risk around the world. I frankly think it is much more than that if you take into account the effects or the lack of effects of companies willing to invest in these environments, and the opportunity cost of job creation is a significant multiple of that. But it also obviously is an enormous threat to people's health or safety or comfort. And again, not surprisingly, we take this probably as one of the most serious areas that we have to deal with in our business. Now, there's a lot to do, but I also think, since most of you are European here, that Europe is fairly well placed in all of this. European countries have always played a major role in shaping a modern and balanced system of IP rights. We can be proud of that. It's not only guarantees that innovations or investments get their due rewards for the investments we make, but it also, frankly, does stimulate a competitive market. We are in a much better position here than in many parts of the world, and we should be grateful for that. So a lot of already has been achieved here, but there are also some areas, perhaps I would be remiss not to use this opportunity, that we could think about together and see if we can set the bar a little bit higher, because this is a moving playing field, and we'll talk about that, some of the points. The first one really that we should talk is the need for legislation that actually allows the confiscation of the proceeds of the IP crime across the total value chain. Transnationally organized networks are increasingly at the heart of this counterfeit. We see that for ourselves. It's very rare that it covers one country. It covers often the globe. And obviously we must be a little bit more aggressive in focusing on stripping them of any of the profits across the total value chain. The actions that often come out when we get the regulatory bodies or the criminal authorities involved is often limited to the people involved at best. Often the costs are we've transferred back to the companies to actually deal with that, including disposal of these products But there is an enormous wealth creation that happens with these counterfeit products across the value chain, and we need to be a little bit more vigilant and determined to go after that. Now, the UK is a pioneer in this field, and I'm happy to be here for that. And I urge, obviously, the European Commission and also its member states to follow in their lead. They will find that the recent BASCAP recommendation paper on this subject is probably a very valuable starting point. So there's some work that has been done, and the observatory that obviously is, I think, well placed perhaps to report on the status of proceeds of crime laws across some of the member states. It would be good to get some transparency on that and simply see if we can set the bar higher. The second point is we need to ensure that the mechanisms are in place through customs and other enforcement bodies to notify the intermediaries that we have in this whole value chain I talked about. So often where we see the infiltration and often the exploitation throughout other parts of the supply chain. These intermediaries who knowingly or sometimes perhaps unknowingly facilitate illicit activities. They also must be put at notice. If you are a transport company, not to be named, and you transport goods, you have a responsibility to ensure that there is a certain level of control, and for other players in the value chain as well, so that they can also take responsibility and prevent that their services are being exploited by criminals. So perhaps customs could look at ways to take a lead in introducing a stricter notification regime with consequences if these notifications are not followed up on. Then, on the third place, we need to look at the increasing exploitation of the online environment. It's a very difficult, fast-moving field, and sometimes you have the impression it's very hard for regulators to keep ahead of this. Now, the virtual world allows an enormous amount of criminal organizations to conduct their illicit affairs, obviously, with a high level of anonymity, and that is a problem. Whether they sell on the marketplace sites or if they sell through almost perfect replication, actually, of illicit branded e-commerce sites. We've discovered sites on e-commerce that just mimic our sites, and frankly, I have to say, sometimes better than our own sites, which even bugs me more. But we had a site for people to apply to Unilever for recruiting. Had our HR manager on there, photo of him, letter from him, everything, recruiting site, and simply was asking people to include the registration fee for the recruiting. Now, a company like ours gets 1.8 million people to apply every year to work for us. So a site out there where people have to pay to register and to enter our recruiting process is about the highest level of fraud. But we can hardly trace where these things happen and what we can do about it. We have to be vigilant about that. But this internet crime is obviously taking off at a speed of 1,000 miles an hour. McAfee recently estimated that cybercrime was worth about 266 billion pounds. That's equivalent to nearly, again, 0.8% of the world economy in that space. And it cost the UK economy alone nearly 9 billion pounds. And obviously, again, has the results of losses. In Europe alone, it was estimated to be 150,000 job losses, but that is far more than that. Now, we've been working several thousand online issues just over the last years alone. And our experience, for example, on fake money off is one, these vouchers that we give, simply for consumers to try our products. We find now a whole industry of fake money off vouchers that are in fact the equivalent of money laundering as far as I'm concerned. But very limited action is being taken around that. Just in the UK alone in 2012, which is the latest data we have, our UK team alone, and we're a fairly big organization here, discovered counterfeit coupon fraud that was conservatively estimated to be the equivalent of about 15% of our total coupons value that we have in the UK. And we have to honor these things. So this whole area of cyber crime is an area where we need governments to reconsider also some of these privacy requirements, some of these protections raised by the ISPs. Can we go after these people and treat them the same way as we would treat money launderers? I have absolutely no problem with that, and I hope you're in the same camp. The fourth one that I quickly want to mention is we need to look at the use of the trade zones for counterfeiting and piracy. Following on from the concerns that were raised by the recent BASCAP report on counterfeiting, on controlling the free trade zones, and there are more and more free trade zones popping up across the world. It's time to ensure that adequate customs involvement and control in these zones are in process, that standards and guidelines are implemented for these zones, that operators that are there ensure that these zones stay clean for responsible businesses. And finally, obviously, not surprisingly, we need to continue to learn from one another so we can effectively identify and share best practices for enforcement. There are many good things happening around the world, but we tend to be a little bit slow in scaling them. So for policymakers, legislators, enforcement agencies, throughout, in your case, the 28 member states of the EU, there's an enormous amount of knowledge and experience out there. And it should be the mission, in my opinion, of the observatory to identify what the best of the best is, both within and outside of the EU, and to raise simply the standard to become the best in the world. Your Turn Back Crime initiative, which was launched on the World Anti-Counterfeit Day last week, is probably one of these initiatives that is a best-in-class practice that we need to scale as soon as we can globally. So I've talked about these 5 steps that we could think about, and I'm sure, or I hope, that today you come out with even other steps in addition to this. We would certainly, as a company, lend our full support to make that come alive. So let me just simply close thanking you once more for the opportunity to be here today. Unfortunately, I have other commitments I need to leave to fly off, but I thought it was important enough to be here with you and give my support on this important topic. I also want to thank the UK and the European Commission once more for lending their support. It's at the heart of successful business is innovation, and that's obviously why we need this be treated at the highest levels. But it's not only at the heart of innovation, it's at the heart of regaining trust in business. It's at the heart of, obviously, how we establish again the ties that we need to re-establish with society to make this a better world for all. So the objective of what you're trying to achieve here is, at the end of the day, in my opinion, making the world function for generations to come. At the end of the day, you're talking the issue not of counterfeit, but you're talking the issue of creating a world where we irreversibly end poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way. And this is an integral part of achieving that. So keep these higher orders in mind, because it creates the necessary energy to attack with a little bit more vigilance this very important topic that you talk. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
I've got a very quick question, which is, you talked about your brand protection team and said there's not much help from the outside. Do you think the balance is wrong? Unilever's spending too much money on this and governments, taxpayers are not?
I would never say we spend too much money on it, because we will spend the money on it what it needs.
But is the balance wrong?
Are you feeling... No, the balance is wrong. We don't have to be political about that. The balance is wrong. Often governments are under pressure, and I will not generalize here. There are good, but governments are under pressure, cutting their expenses. And often that is not done at the right places. The costs that we incur are actually going up, and costs that actually should be transferred to the broader society, and not really on the back of companies. Even if it involves our products, we're dealing here with crimes. They might use our products for the crimes, but often we incur enormous costs. Enormous cost, for example, of disposal of these counterfeit products. It's very seldom that governments do that. And if governments do that, it's very unreliable, and they turn up somewhere else again. So if you deal with these crimes...
And are governments, enforcement agencies feeling, is the balance of sort of belief wrong, that they think they're helping you, and you're thinking, hold on a second, this is help making society work?
I think you need to, there are many that get it, and certainly here in this audience, and as I mentioned, Europe is probably ahead of a lot of it, but don't underestimate the enormous amount of education that you need to do in many parts of the world still, amongst many politicians, on the importance of counterfeit. And even in Europe, there is always a force that people feel is a force of, yeah, but we could make products available much cheaper to a part of the population that otherwise couldn't afford it. So we have hidden forms of counterfeit, which we call copycats. And the laws in Europe in that sense are also marginally attractive, to be honest. So there is sometimes we are conflicted ourselves with the determination to attack this. So don't be shy about acknowledging.
You're an angry man.
No, I'm not at all. I'm very hopeful that we find a solution, because seeing all the people turn out here. You just have to keep at it. You have to keep at it. But this is an issue for all of us, and it's an issue of humanity. It's not an issue of companies against the rest or not. It's an issue of making this world function.
Paul Polman.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.